Hi, guys. Welcome back to Crime Time with Jess. Happy Sunday to you all. So, I'm going to say some things that might make you wonder what this has to do with true crime, and we'll get there. But first, this morning, Tyler and I slept in. We talked about going to church this morning last night, but alas, we slept in. Now, before we left Delaware, we attended a church called United. We only went a few services before we came to Oklahoma, but they made sure to let us know they live streamed their services. Hi, Jess. Today we remembered that and decided to watch the service on our TV, just live stream it on our TV. And I wasn't prepared for what happens. A pastor named Davey Blackburn, I've never seen him before in my life, comes on, and his sermon is on forgiveness, right? Now, this is a topic that has been a theme personally for me for the last almost year of my life. I forgave someone I never thought I would forgive, but it did free me. Um, I let go. And I genuinely hope the best for them, and I still do. But the things I forgave pale in comparison to Pastor Davey. Okay. So we're going to go backwards here because I want you to see this story the way I experienced it today. I'm going to show you clips of the service that I watched, and then we're going to get into how this is related to true crime. So it's really crazy this is happening in my hometown in Delaware, that this pastor is there. I really wish I could have met him in person. But we're going to go to parts of that sermon that I watched today. And I'm going to have to pull this up on my phone so I can make sure that this is live streaming and it doesn't happen, or that my screen is being shared. So what happened yesterday doesn't happen again, or I have to redo this video all over. So let me just make sure that my screen is being shared. Yes, it is. Perfect. I want to make this bigger. Okay, so this is Pastor Davey. Now, just keep in mind, me and Tyler are just watching this. We have no idea anything about this his background or nothing, okay? But he's giving this whole thing on forgiveness. And you might want to turn your volume up a little bit because the volume for this was pretty low.
Those offenses and those outrages on nearly every platform. And the enemy wants to lure you into that because what he wants to do is he wants to trap you and get you stuck so he can thwart the plan that God has for you. And I want you to know, if there's nothing else you get in here today and nothing else you get in this series, I want you to understand that there is freedom in forgiveness. You hear me? Many of you guys are going, okay, how do I break free? I believe the primary way the enemy tries to get us stuck, to get us in bondage, is to get a little tiny foothold in the area of resentment in our lives. That there are very real things that people have done to us and said to us that as they begin to fester inside of us, they form a cancer inside of us. It's a foothold the enemy gets in our lives, and that foothold becomes a stronghold. And that stronghold does not just deteriorate our relationships. It does not just deteriorate our lives and how we show up in the world. It deteriorates our very soul, and it will manifest itself in our body. In fact, Pastor Kenneth alluded to this, but there are so many links physiologically. My wife right now is a PA, a functional medicine PA, so she's done lots of studies on the interconnectedness of our mind, our heart, and our body. And there's so much research, scientific-based research, that links cancer to resentment. You hear me? So I want you to understand this is serious, because if the enemy can start to get that root of resentment in your heart, then he can sideline you. Your entire life can be sidelined so you can no longer operate on purpose in the full potential that God has for you.
Now, this really resonated with me because I understand exactly what he's saying. I spent a lot of years being angry with a lot of bitterness towards my one of my parents, um, and I could not forgive. And I'll never forget my son Jace saying to me, he was describing to me how he's viewed all his brothers and sisters. And he was being funny, and he's like, oh, my brother Gage this, and my Callie is this way, and Austin's this way. And he's just describing them as people. And he's being funny about it. And I said, well, how do you see me? If you see them that way, how do you see me? And he said, well, I think you're like a tortured soul, Mom. And I was like, tortured soul? Yeah, that's not what I was expecting him to say. And he goes, you're just you're either sad or you're mad. And that shocked me, because here I thought that I was hiding this from him. But that he I would talk to him or try to joke with him or laugh with him or relate to him, but he saw through me. As much as I thought I was hiding that, I wasn't. My 11-year-old could see through that. And there were instances of me lashing out at people that just did not deserve it. And I would justify it in my head. Well, they did this to me or they did that to me. But the problem is that the people that I really needed to come to a resolution with, forgive, um, I hadn't done that. I just didn't do that, and that was never on the table. I think people can quote me 1,000 times saying, "You don't have to forgive people. You don't have to do that. That people are not entitled to your forgiveness." I would say things like that, but that was my anger talking. Um, and with all of the trauma that I have been through in the last 2 years, it's humbled me. It humbled me, and it made me look at things that maybe my mother had gone through, and maybe why she acted in ways that she did. And I wanted to forgive her, because I want that same forgiveness from my children. So when I saw this, I was like, I want to hear this sermon. So I listened to him do this whole sermon on forgiveness, and he talks about Saul, who became Paul. If you guys don't know who that is, or you don't follow religion like that, Saul he was a Jewish man, and he really, really hated Christians. And he would go around and rip them out of their house and arrest them, and he would murder them. And one day he's on his way, and God speaks to him, and he asks him, why are you doing this? Why are you persecuting them? And from that point on in the Bible, Saul becomes Paul, and he sits amongst the disciples, and he is forgiven, and he's forgiven by God, and he's forgiven by them. And he went on to, preach all over the place and build churches and all of that. But at the root of it is forgiveness, right? So I watched him give this whole sermon on that. And then we get to this part, because I didn't know this was coming. I had no idea. Again, nothing about this man, nothing about his story, nothing about him, nothing about nothing. So we get to the end, and he starts saying that, his wife was murdered. Like, his wife was murdered? What? You just gave a whole thing on forgiveness. Your wife was murdered. So I want you to hear what he has to say about this. I think it's very, very powerful. He's going to read to you one of the victim impact statements that he gave at his wife's trial. His wife was murdered by 3 men. They did a home invasion. She was pregnant with their second child, and they shot her in the back of the head. Before entering their home, they had been doing a string of burglaries around their town. So they had saw Pastor Ken leave in the morning to go to the gym, and they decided to go into that house. And when they did, they met Pastor Pastor Davey. I think I said Pastor Ken. Pastor Davey's wife, Amanda, and she did attempt to fight back because they did have a child already, and her fighting back, they shot her in the back of the head. Now he came home, and when he walked into his house, he found her naked and face down on the ground. But I want you to hear what he has to say and what he said to one of her murderers.
Of all the Lord's people. Wow. This grace was given to me to preach to the Gentiles the boundless riches of Christ. Then he goes on. The very last thing we see is this. Here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into this world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. You see the progressive journey of Paul? As he became closer to Christ, as his journey of faith continued, he realized who he really was. How could God save such a wretched sinner like me? Can I tell you something? I know what I've done. And I think more importantly, I know the thoughts that I have. And the closer I get to Jesus, the more conviction I feel about those. The more humble I feel that Jesus would choose to save me. As I begin to see that, I start to see, man, the same anger that I can feel in my heart, the same covetousness, jealousy, rage, the same things that I feel in my heart are the same things and the same seeds the enemy took. And he germinated those seeds in the hearts of the three men that killed my wife. I wrestle with the same sin that they wrestle with. And don't look at me judging me, because you do too. You do too. And when you begin to realize, you look introspectively at your own heart and go, man, were it not for the grace of God, that would be me too. Then you start to form a compassion and an empathy. And it gives you a measure of grace that allows you to walk every day in forgiveness and begin to pray for your enemies. My question is, do you pray for your enemies as fervently as you pray for yourself or for your kids? I ask that and I feel very convicted myself. But I want to close with this. I'll invite my keys person to come up because I want to share with you. I want to share with you the letter that I read in the courtroom to one of the guys that killed Amanda. And I want to share this with you for a reason. I read wrote three different letters to the three different guys, tried to be very specific and personal to each one of them, and what I knew about their stories, what I knew about them. This was the first one. And this one had me up at night because there was a stronghold that was on my heart and on my life. I had, for years, had been operating and thinking I was walking in forgiveness, but something about actually putting these words to paper and then having to read them out loud showed me that I still had a whole lot of work to do in my heart. Can I just say this? Maybe today you need to go and write a letter. And maybe you need to list out everything. I'm going to kind of give you a rubric here as I'm reading this letter as an example, but maybe you need to list out everything that person did to you. And maybe you need to, don't diminish it. Don't whitewash it. Like, list out everything that it made you feel. And then maybe you need to, in that letter, step into the forgiveness that Jesus so freely offered you and communicate that. And if it's wise, maybe you give that letter to that person. For many of us, it may not even be wise to give the letter to, or it may not even be possible. But what it will do to set you free, because I walked into this moment as I stood on the stand to read this letter, and I couldn't look this man in the eye. And I was so fearful, and I was shaking. Like I was feeling it viscerally. But as soon as I read the first words, I felt this. I cannot describe it, friends, except for this massive rush of the Holy Spirit. And all of that, like shaking, it just quelled. And there was this peace. And it was almost like the enemy was trying to get me, like he did not want me to go step into this moment and read it. But as soon as I chose, as soon as I like stepped into the Jordan River, come on, as soon as I took that faith step of obedience, God showed up. And this is what I read. I said, my name is Davey Blackburn. I'm here representing Amanda, my family, and the Byers family. Amanda was my wife, my best friend, my partner, my confidant, my entire world. I'm not sure how anyone stands up here and attempts to bring some sort of closure to such a horrible situation, and maybe it's not the point of this moment. I've spent days, weeks, years even trying to figure out what the point of this moment is. There really is no closure for what's been done. November 10th, 2015 opened up a loop for our family that will never be closed, because it opened up a wound that can never be fully healed on this side of eternity. I don't know how anyone goes through something like this without knowing the healing power of Jesus. Because of him, our wounds are no longer gaping holes, but now have become scars. Scars that tell a story of loss, grief, and pain, and also a story of hope, forgiveness, and redemption. And yet, Jalen, I can't imagine the wounding you must have gone through somewhere in your story. What in the world would possess someone to walk into a house that's not theirs, look my beautiful, innocent, pure bride in her eyes, and continue to carry out the atrocious things you did? It was sick. It was sadistic. It was twisted. It was horrible. And I'm sure it had to have come from a deep, deep place of pain, anger, and bitterness. I've thought long and hard and even dreamed about if you and I were to sit down and have a conversation, what would come of it. Perhaps we'd start the conversation out by me telling you a little of Amanda's story. Maybe I'd tell you about this cute girl with curly blonde hair who brought so much joy and laughter to her home when she was a child. Maybe I'd tell you how she began to grow up. As she began to grow up, she relentlessly pursued a life of purity, desiring to honor God and her future husband in every dating decision she made. Maybe I'd tell you how she threw herself into causes to help the oppressed and the hurting and the broken. Maybe I'd tell you when I met her as a senior in high school, her one prayer was that the Lord would let her life matter for something bigger than herself. Maybe I'd tell you about her compassion for people, how she made everyone she interacted with feel like they were the most important person in the room. Maybe I'd tell you what a breath of fresh air she was as she interacted with people at antique markets on the weekends, and how people came to her booth to talk with her and confide in her more than they did to buy her products. Maybe I'd tell you how much she loved hosting people and welcoming them into our home, how much she loved making them feel comfortable, and how she dreamed of getting more training and counseling so she could help people heal through their deepest hurts. Maybe I'd tell you how much she loved our little boy, Weston. What a joy it was to watch her nurture him, care for him, protect him, and pour herself into the first 15 months of his life. Maybe I'd tell you how thrilled she was to find out we were having another one, and how she had already begun picking out furniture and decorations for her nursery. And maybe, as I told you these things about her, I would see something happen on your end. Maybe I would see deep remorse, a sincere sadness over what you did, a longing to make it right, a resolve to face whatever repercussions may be in store for you. If somehow before all of this, before November 10th, you would have taken the time to learn her story, maybe the heinous acts that you committed that morning would seem so abhorrent to you, it might have compelled you to put a stop to all of it. And then I imagine the conversation would turn to you and your story. And I'm sure, or at least I'm hopeful, that as I asked questions and heard more of your story and your woundings and your pain, something would materialize on my side. Compassion, empathy, grace, sadness over what you've gone through. Maybe I'm an idealist, or maybe I'm completely naive, but perhaps there would be something in that moment that would catalyze healing or hope. You see, what I've learned is that's what learning someone's story does. Jalen, since we may never get the opportunity to sit down to the conversation I just described, you need to know that I forgive you. I release you. And deciding that is more for me and my family and my future than it is for you. I refuse to hang on to the wounding you've inflicted on us. I refuse to carry it around. I know by carrying it, it can do nothing but fester and rot and begin to form a life of its own. I know by keeping this wounding around, it will become a monster that at best further wounds me and others, and at worst destroys us all. But you know that, don't you, Jalen? Because I can only assume you've held on to some major wounds in your life. And unfortunately, you decided on November 10th to partner with those wounds and to cooperate with that monster inside of you and to release it onto others for your gain with no regard to others' lives or their hopes or their dreams or their future. Whether you realize it or not, you choose to be a conduit for hatred, rage, and bitterness. And I'm standing in front of you today telling you man to man, human being to human being, that I refuse to do the same. At some point in this, I got such a surge of strength only from the Holy Spirit that I looked at him and said, Jalen, look me in the eye right now. Prior to this, I couldn't look him in the eye. And for whatever reason, as I'm stepping into sharing with him that I chose to forgive him, now all of a sudden the Holy Spirit empowered. You see that? Broken, chains, freedom. So I said this. But I'm also hoping that my decision to forgive you does something inside of you, because today, right here, right now, I want to implore you to stop partnering with your pain and start partnering with something else from here on out. Because while there still may be a monster of pain growing inside of you, I know there is also a still small voice that's inviting you to a better story. There's an alternate route for you to take. I sense the voice of Jesus has been whispering to you that you can be forgiven, that you can walk clean, that you can start over even now, that everything you've done can be erased in his eyes by merely receiving him, that your future can be changed, your very identity can be changed by choosing to live for him instead. I pray you haven't silenced that voice. I pray your pain hasn't smothered it. How do I know this voice is calling you? Because he did it for me. He called me out of my sin. That's right, my sin. I know I'm not standing here on trial today, but my sin nailed Jesus to the cross just as much as yours did. Even though my sin is less public and has created less damage to others, it put Jesus on the cross nonetheless. And yet at the very moment he was hanging there for all to see, as he was being mocked and as insults were being hurled at him, he said, Father, forgive them, for they don't understand what they're doing. I've experienced his forgiveness in a real, life-altering way, and it has freed me. And in light of that, it would be a spiritual impossibility to stand here and not extend the same thing to you. So yes, Jalen, you're here facing sentencing, but the truth is, everyone in this courtroom, including me, deserves to face a similar sentencing. Not necessarily one of doing time in a physical prison, but we all deserve grave repercussions for what we've done and what we've thought and for the condition of our hearts. We've all gone our own way. We're all guilty of living selfishly and not considering who it may impact. More seriously, we've all committed heinous crimes against Jesus, and yet in spite of that, he's offered us a better way of life. He's invited us to not give in to the trappings of hatred and violence and anger and vengeance and self-preservation. Instead, he's invited us to wield more powerful weapons, not weapons that wound, but weapons that heal. Weapons of love and grace and mercy and forgiveness and compassion and humility. He's inviting us to let those realities transform our hearts and then spill over to others as well. We are invited to no longer act in retaliation to our wounds, but to receive his wounds and by his wounds be healed. So Jalen, as crazy as this may sound, I hold nothing against you. Will you still face consequences here on earth for your crimes? Yes, and you should, to the degree that you feel the weight of what you've done and to the degree that you've let remorse change you into a different Jalen when you are eventually released. But as for me, I release you. You're free from any debt you owe me for what you've taken from me. My trust is in a higher authority who judges the hearts and intentions of men, not just their actions. And I beg you to accept and step into freedom that judge, Jesus, has to offer you as well.
That's very hard for me to listen to without crying. Okay, you guys know I'm a big crybaby. So I watched this, right, and I'm crying. I'm crying like I am now. I'm crying. Tyler's looking at me because he always looks at me when I cry about things like this. So he's looking at me, and I'm like, leave me alone. This is tough, I'm picturing all this in my head. But again, I don't know this pastor. I don't know Amanda. I don't know any of this. So of course, when I get done with this, I go to look it up, and yeah, it's all there. So we are going to watch another video, and this you're going to get to see Pastor Davey's wife and the man that killed her. Oops. Hang on a second. So sorry, I do get emotional. But I feel like those of you that have watched me should probably know that by now. All right. So this is
every guest star.
I'm so glad you.
A judge took just 15 minutes to find an Indianapolis man guilty today of murdering a pastor's wife. Larry Joe Taylor shot Amanda Blackburn to death during a home invasion in 2015. Now, this was the third time this case has gone to trial after 2 previous mistrials. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. I'm Nick McGill.
And I'm Max Lewis, and I was in the courtroom for this verdict today. I spoke with Blackburn's husband, who says he is now relieved that this nightmare is over. Walking out of the court.
I just want to pause for just a second and tell you that this just happened. This trial was finally settled in 2022, September, I believe, of 2022. So it hasn't even been 2 years. And, you know, you were just watching him on my screen from today.
Courtroom, Pastor Davey Blackburn, with tears in his eyes, said he was relieved that a nearly 7-year nightmare had come to an end.
It's always a relief to know the truth. It's been a long journey for our family.
This painful journey for the Blackburn family began on November 10th, 2015, when Larry Taylor, Jalen Watson, and Deanna Gordon entered the Blackburn home early in the morning after seeing Davey leave. According to prosecutors, Larry stayed behind while the other two took a bank card and went to steal money from an ATM. Prosecutors stated in court that Larry Taylor shot Amanda twice, once in the head, after he tried to sexually assault her and she fought back. Amanda died 2 days later.
We know that Amanda's with Jesus, and we know none of this is going to bring her back, and so that makes us extremely sad.
Watson and Gordon took plea deals and testified against Taylor in exchange for having their murder charges dropped. Watson was sentenced to 29 years in prison. Gordon has yet to be sentenced. The prosecution credited the guilty verdict to the community speaking out.
It was a case that was really dependent on our community stepping up and coming into court and testifying about what they saw.
Amanda's father said all he has is gratitude in his heart.
We're grateful for the verdict. But we have been trusting in both the Lord and the system.
Davey has said in the past he forgives the men involved in his wife's killing and reiterated today that he couldn't get through this without his faith.
This entire journey, he has the final say on all of it, and we can put our trust and rest in him no matter what happens.
Now, as we said at the top, this was the third time this case has gone to trial. At the end of last year, a mistrial was declared after it was accidentally revealed in court that Amanda was pregnant when she was killed. The judge said it would prejudice the jury since Taylor wasn't charged in the fetus's death. During the second trial this year, a mistrial was declared after a member of the jury lied about having any previous knowledge of the case. Attorneys for Larry Taylor told us today they had no comment.
So if you guys are wondering what Larry Taylor got, he got 86 years. Okay. And the other 2 men, one of them got 29 years and one of them got 30 years. So I don't know what you guys all think about that, but it was just really, I felt like it's Sunday and this true crime somehow found its way into my world when I was trying to watch a church service. But I just think that the message of forgiveness is so powerful because it's so difficult to do. And I like, if I'm going to link that church service in the comments if you guys want to watch the whole sermon, because it was actually really, really good. But yes, so prayers for Pastor Blackburn and his family. He is remarried now, and I think 2 years after Amanda's death, he got engaged and got remarried, and he has the other children with his current wife. But as you can see, he's still preaching about forgiveness, and it's very interesting that I understood at the end why he picked Saul, who turned into Paul, why he picked his story to tell, because he was a murderer and God still forgave him. And, he picked that story to tell just like the men. Can you imagine standing there and looking at your spouse's killer and truly offering them forgiveness? That's got to be so difficult to do. I think it's much easier to hate and to be angry than it is to forgive and truly feel that. So I hope you guys have a blessed Sunday, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'll probably have something new with the Daybell trial, Chad's trial. So bye for now.